Today we are continuing our series, as I mentioned earlier, continuing our journey through Advent. We've been, for the last couple of weeks, doing this Advent series of the promise. Advent meaning, Adventus is the Latin word that it comes from, meaning arrival or coming, and we are anticipating the arrival of Jesus. That is to say, we are reconnecting with the ancient anticipation of God fulfilling his promise to bring the Messiah, to bring hope and peace and joy and love through him and through his reign. And so we celebrate that God fulfilled his promise as he entered into our story in the incarnation and became one of us in the story that is told this time of year in the birth of Jesus. And we also lean forward with the anticipation that because God fulfilled his promises in the past, he continues to fulfill his promises into the future. And he has said he will return to bring us home, and we look forward with anticipation to that day as well. That is what this season is all about, reminding us of these truths that we hold throughout the year. And so we celebrate all that is available to us in Jesus. The themes of Advent are hope and peace and joy and love. We celebrated a couple of weeks ago that there is hope in Jesus, that hope is not just an idea, hope is a person. Hope is not dependent on our circumstances, it is in who reigns over all things. And his kingdom that he sits on the throne of at this moment is a kingdom of peace. He is the Prince of Peace. And even though we see strife and chaos around us, we know that delivered to those shepherds on that hillside near Bethlehem was a proclamation of peace, that the king was entering the world to bring peace, to bring shalom, that is to say, wholeness, completeness, things functioning the way they should under his reign. And as we live under his reign, we find peace. Today, we move to the third theme of Advent, which is joy. There is a lot to love about Christmas. I know some people just really love Christmas this time of year. Sometimes people maybe react to that in a way that makes them feel a little grinchy, perhaps. But it is a season where a lot of people find a lot to love about this time of year. Whether it's getting an opportunity to spend time with family and friends in a unique way, or maybe it is the anticipation of receiving or giving gifts. Or maybe you just love the traditions that your family has surrounding this time of year, and you look forward to those kinds of things. For some of us, it is all of the food that comes along with this time of year, especially the desserts. There's so much food. Maybe you like the lights. We went to the Collinsville parade last night and saw all kinds of lights decorating vehicles and people's bodies as they walked down the street, and that was cool to see the lights. We love driving around and looking at the Christmas decorations in our neighborhood and around town, at the lights on people's house. I love the way that our building gets transformed by some of our talented people around here, and it's beautiful to see in a way that we don't see the rest of the year. But there is a lot to love about Christmas. Maybe it's especially exciting when you realize that you have gotten the perfect gift for somebody. Maybe somebody that's sometimes hard to buy for, or you've had a great idea and you got the right thing and you just can't wait until they open it. You're anticipating that moment when they will unveil what you've picked out for them, and their face will hopefully light up with the joy that you feel in giving it to them. I know I've been in that situation before, and a lot of times in my family, we sometimes can't help but open gifts a little bit early. Sometimes my wife and I, we've bought something, we're like, why don't you just go ahead and open it? I don't even have to wrap it. Just take it out of the sack, you know. And sometimes we feel like it's because we look forward to, maybe we want to get out of wrapping it, but we look forward to that moment of giving the gift that we know was great, anticipating the joy of that moment of discovery. When you have joy within you, sometimes it can be hard to hold back. It can be hard to hide a joyful spirit. We want to share things that bring us joy. When you read the prophets in the Old Testament, they speak of the coming of the Messiah, especially when I read Isaiah. They're speaking of a new day, and they're writing in a moment of very difficult times for God's people. They write of a new day that is coming, where the Messiah will arrive. And you can sense in some of those prophecies, you can sense that God is almost excited. It seems like God is eager to share this gift that he has for his people. As soon as the time is right, God is bringing the greatest gift of all. God is pointing us toward Jesus. He is pointing his people hundreds of years before Jesus enters into our story in a manger. God is pointing to Jesus way, way before that time comes. And we see it in prophecies like in Isaiah, where Isaiah says in 52:7, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, 'Your God reigns.' The voice of the watchman, they lift up their voice. Together they sing for joy. For eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion." This is an exciting passage when you sort of get into the mindset of it in a time of difficulty, in a time where the things that have been coming to the city gates are conquerors to destroy. And this is a moment where somebody is coming instead to bring good news, to bring hope, to bring a message of peace, to recognize your God reigns. Your God sits on the throne. And those watchmen who are at the watchtowers watching as this person approaches to bring this message, they can't help but sing out in joy. As they alert the city of who is coming, their message is one of joy. They sing out for joy at the greatest gift ever given. And so our first point as we think about joy this morning is that the arrival of the Messiah is the ultimate cause for true joy. To recognize that the King of all things, whose kingdom is one that brings peace, that is very good news. And good news brings us joy. Have you ever received really good news and your heart just leapt with joy? Maybe news of your own pregnancy, or of a grandchild that's coming, or of somebody getting married that you're excited about, or if you ever experienced those moments of good news, you got the job, you're graduating, you've got all your credits, you receive the good news, and your heart can't help but feel that joy. We read last week the angel coming to the shepherds on that hillside, surprising them, and they are, of course, they recoil in fear at first, but telling them, "Fear not, because I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all the people." I hope you experience joy in the good news that we celebrate right now, because your God reigns. Don't let this world get you down. Your God reigns. His kingdom has been established, and he sits on his throne. He is the answer to the nonsense that we see around us, all of the abuse of power in this world, all of the division between people in this world is overcome by the one who reigns. A few months before the angel announced that good news to those shepherds that Jesus had been born, there was another baby that was born a few months prior to that. One who would go before Jesus and prepare his way, the one who was laying the groundwork for the Messiah, the beautiful feet bringing the good news. It was Jesus' cousin or relative, John. His ministry was also prophesied in Isaiah. And we see it here. Isaiah 40 verse 3. A voice cries in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. This describes a time that would lead up to the arrival of the Messiah, a time of preparation, a time that involved something of straightening, something of leveling, so that the glory of God in Jesus could be seen by all people. When I think about those terms and the image that's being painted there, I think about construction. And I think back to a few years ago when we built this facility and how after the old building was torn down, there was, for a long time, some construction vehicles on this property moving dirt around, and we kept waiting for parts of it to get dry enough to do what we needed to do, and they ended up digging up a whole bunch of it and replacing it with new dirt, and had to do all of this stuff to get it all level and right, so that when we started to build, it would be prepared to build properly. I mean, if you've been through a construction at your house or other place, you've seen that as well. The dirt work is important. The preparation is a key phase to being able to fully enjoy any great thing. Any great event needs preparation. For many people, the day after Thanksgiving is a day of preparation to begin the preparation for Christmas. Sometimes it happens a little bit before that, sometimes a little bit after, but generally right around the day after Thanksgiving is when we start dragging the decorations out of the attic and start setting up the tree or going to the tree farm to cut one down and start stringing up the lights and getting everything ready. It's when things start transforming around here and we start getting all the decorations around here. We start making plans for the Christmas party, and we start making plans for Christmas Eve and all of these things that we anticipate. The preparation is a key part of what is going on as we anticipate celebrating the arrival of Jesus. When we actually did arrive, God had planned a time of preparation before his arrival. And the promise was that God's people would see that preparation taking place. That they would be ready, that those barriers, those things that made the path crooked and high and low, those barriers to experiencing the joy of the arrival of the Messiah would be cleared out. They would be removed. No desert, no mountain, no valley, no rugged place would stand in the way of the arrival of the Messiah. He would come. And as we move into the New Testament, we encounter a man named Zechariah. Zechariah was a priest in the temple. And when we see him, he's doing his process of burning incense and worship while people prayed outside. And we see his story in Luke chapter 1, verse 11, as God begins to fulfill this promise. There appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him, as happens every time somebody encounters an angel. And the angel said to him, just like to the shepherds, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you shall call his name John. You will have joy and gladness, and many will rejoice at his birth, for he will be great before the Lord. He must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from his mother's womb. And he will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. And so Zechariah gets this message, a message of joy. He says, you will have joy and gladness, and it will cause other people to rejoice with what is going on here. Apparently, Zechariah and Elizabeth had been longing for and praying for a son. And the angel tells him, your prayers have been answered. And his prayer is answered in a big way. In a big way, it's not just a son, it is a very special son that will bring, again, joy and gladness and cause people to rejoice. This will be somebody that lives under what appears to be a Nazarite vow, which includes several things, including not drinking alcohol. It includes not cutting hair, and it includes not touching dead bodies. All that's mentioned here is the alcohol, but it seems to be a Nazarite vow, or at least something similar. As an interesting side note, somebody else that was under a vow like that from birth was Samuel. And Samuel was one who anointed David. That's an interesting connection. And David was the one who received the promise that his descendant would have a throne that never ended. That's why Jesus is referred to as the son of David. He's the fulfillment of that promise. And so there seems to be some sort of possible connection between those two. Whatever the case, this boy, because of this vow, it is indicating that this boy was special. He was set apart for a particular purpose. God is using him to bring joy to his family and to the world because he would announce the arrival of the Messiah. Now, our mission as the church, I find very similar, sharing a lot in common with John, because we seek to prepare the way for Jesus in the hearts of others as well. Amen. We seek to prepare the way, and in fact, this is one of our greatest joys as followers of Jesus. To serve in this way is a great joy, to prepare the way of the Lord to the hearts of the people around us, to prepare in them, to try to be people who are clearing out the barriers, finding ways, avenues in to connect people to Jesus. We have a mission that is infused with joy because it is making a difference in the lives of people, connecting them to the one who reigns over all things, who brings that hope and that peace, and yes, that joy because of his love. We are part of that mission. And maybe it's especially apparent in times of the year like this, when we are focusing in on the story. And this is one of the reasons why we choose to celebrate Christmas in the way that we do, because we see it as an opportunity to share Jesus with the world in a way that they are prepared to hear more so than at other times. And so we want to be people who are preparing the way of Jesus in the hearts of people around us. I think it's true that the most joyful people in the world are the ones who experience the hope and the peace of God because of their trust in Jesus. Because they have a joy that isn't built on the same things that others build it on. It isn't reliant on the things that come and go. It is reliant on a king who sits on a throne that has no end. And so we can be the most joyful people in the world. When we have that joy, it's reflected in the way that we speak, in the way that we serve others, in the way that we treat others, because we recognize that all of those interactions with other people, however traditionally likable they may be or not, are ways of preparing the way for Jesus. And if we speak in other ways, if we treat them in other ways, we are missing an opportunity to prepare the way for Jesus. Joy in this world is in short supply. People need joy. People around us are miserable. People around us are in over their heads with sin. People around us are heartbroken with pain. People around us are hopeless in their suffering. Now is the time to minister to that by sharing the joy of Jesus and the shalom that we experience because of him. And so I just ask you to reflect. How can your life be a beacon? How can your life be a beacon of light in this dark world? That was John's call. That was John's call. To send out that message, to be a herald proclaiming, to be those beautiful feet bringing the good news that the watchmen hear and begin to sing in joy. That was John's call. And it's ours too, I believe. And so Zechariah has received this message from an angel saying, you're going to have this kind of son. This is going to be the fulfillment of this prophecy. You're going to have this son that is going to bring this joy. And Zechariah has, an interesting response that has a consequence. We won't spend a lot of time on this part, but Zechariah said to the angel, how shall I know this? Which I think is a way of saying, you've got to be kidding me. For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And the angel answered him, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and bring you this good news. In other words, do you recognize who you're talking to? You don't believe me? Behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time. It will happen, Zechariah. Until then, you will not be able to speak. So Zechariah responds in a way that is skeptical of the good news. And in part, at least from a fleshly perspective, how can you blame him? He says it's similar to Abraham and Sarah, right? He says, we're too old to have kids. We've already seen indicated that that's what he's been praying for, right? He's been praying that they would have kids, and he gets the message, your prayer is going to be answered. And then when that happens, it seems almost too good to be true. It is too good. The good news is too good to be true. And because of his unbelief in that moment, he's not condemned, but he is silenced for now. I would just use that to say, we have very good news in Christ. And sometimes when we really reflect on that good news, it maybe can seem like it's too good to be true. Do not allow unbelief to silence you. The good news of God coming to us in the flesh to rescue us may seem too good to be true, but it is the reality that we all need. It is the reality that this world is desperate for, and it is our joy to share it. When we respond with faith, when we rejoice in this good news together, we share joy with our neighbors, with the world around us who desperately need it. And so after this message is received by Zechariah, we fast forward just a little bit to the birth of this promised boy who would prepare the way of the Messiah. We move on to verse 57. Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. And her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her. They rejoiced with her, just as the angel said. And on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child. And they would have called him Zechariah after his father, but his mother answered, no, he shall be called John. And they said to her, none of your relatives is called by that name. They made signs to his father, inquiring what he wanted him to be called. And he asked for a writing tablet, and he wrote, "His name is John." And they all wondered. And immediately his mouth was opened and his tongue loosed, and he spoke, blessing God. And fear came on all their neighbors, and all these things were talked about through all the hill country of Judea. And all who heard them laid them up on their hearts, saying, "What then will this child be?" For the hand of the Lord was with him. And so the blessed moment comes at the birth of the child, and they need to decide on what the name is. I can remember having those conversations when both of our children were expected to be born. Those of you who've had kids, you've had those conversations in your family as well. What shall we name this child? What are they going to be called? And it was a fun thing to sort of bounce around the ideas and try to think about, well, this other person in our family has this name. Do we want to sort of pass this down? Or maybe we want to carry along the initials of the other people in our family and try to pass on this idea. And ultimately, we decided on what we thought sounded good, right? I remembered when we named Sophia. I had in school, I had learned about in Proverbs, the lady wisdom in Proverbs is personified wisdom in the Greek is the word Sophia. And that had stuck with me all the way until we had Sophia. And I just had liked that idea of lady wisdom being the name of my child. And so that was ultimately why we landed on that. And Sam, well, we had a hard time thinking of a name for Sam, and that one, we just thought, that's a good, solid, classic name, and we're going to stick with that, and it sounds good, and it really suits him now. But you can think about, how do you decide? And for many people, it is a family name that gets passed on, and that would have been the tradition for Zechariah. Zechariah was expected to name his child after himself, to want that, especially one that they had been anticipating for so long. This one child that they were going to have, and they hadn't been able to have any others all this time, and finally, surely he wants to pass on the family name. To not name him that is a sacrifice. And don't miss that. It's not a small thing. To lay aside that desire to pass on your own name and to trust in what the angel said, the instructions that the angel gave to name him John. And in this moment, Zechariah trusts in the angel's words where he had doubted before, and his mouth is opened, and he's able to speak once again. John, by the way, means something like graced by God, or the Lord has been gracious. It is a proclamation of the grace of God in this boy, which speaks volumes to the joy that would surround his life. He would be somebody putting on display the grace of God. Even in his birth, the grace of God is demonstrated to Zechariah and Elizabeth, who had not been able to have a child and longed for this. Grace of God was demonstrated through John's life as he prepared the world for the coming of the Messiah, the Savior, our King, Jesus, who reigns forever. And the family celebrates the birth of John, sharing in the joy of God's work among them. And again, once Zechariah trusted in the angel's words in that moment and named him John, he could speak again. And did you notice what the first thing he did with his ability to speak was? He praised God, which I think is an outburst of joy to the Lord. He praised God. Once he was able to speak, the first thing he did was rejoice. This should be our response as well, as our faith connects us with the grace of God. Our joy, too, is rooted in the grace of God that gives us an eternal perspective. I said when we talked about hope, that having hope is like having new spiritual eyes, to see a different reality beyond the chaos and the terrible things that happen around us. It's new eyes to see the greater reality of what God is doing. That continues on in our expression of joy. It is rooted in the grace of God, giving us an eternal perspective. As Austin read for us earlier in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 8, I'll remind you again, Peter writes to a persecuted church to give them something to hold on to. And he says, you have not seen him. Although you have not seen him, you love him. Speaking of Jesus. Though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. This joy is beyond being able to explain, beyond being able to express. It's filled with glory. It is a joy that pours out of God's people despite what's around them. It is that greater reality, and he points to salvation of our souls. Something that you are already obtaining, it says. Obtaining is present tense. Salvation of your souls. It means that we are citizens of that kingdom. Citizens of God's kingdom, not just stuck in this world. It means that we are members of that family. We are loved by our God, and we have a future that is more glorious than anything that this world offers. And that brings us joy. At the present, we know who really is in charge. We know who really is in charge, and we serve him, not the rulers of this world. We serve him with joy. So again, like hope and peace, joy is not contingent on things going the way that we want them to in this world. Because we are part of a bigger story, and in that we rejoice. Paul says in this short little verse, Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always. He doesn't leave a lot of room for exceptions. And to emphasize it, he says, I'll say it again, just in case you missed it the first time. Rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. Notice he says, in the Lord is where we rejoice, not in your fortunate circumstances. And when Paul writes this, he is in prison unjustly, and he is writing to a church who is persecuted, and he tells them to rejoice. The only way somebody in this situation, writing to people in that situation, can say these words is that they are rejoicing in the Lord and not in the world around them. And you also notice that rejoice is in the command form. Rejoice is the verb form of joy. It is putting joy into action. The call to rejoice is a call to choose joy. It is a call to remember who we are in him. It is a call to remember who it is that we actually serve, and based on that, to choose joy in spite of all the reasons not to. We choose joy. Or to put it in a preacher way, rejoice is a choice. It is our choice to rejoice. And when we choose lives of joy, our light pushes back the darkness of this world. That is when we are a city on a hill. That is when we are a light in the darkness, lighting the way. We are a lamp that is not covered up. We should be people that are marked by joy because of the grace given to us. God has been so gracious to us. Through the King that John announced, God has been gracious to us. We live our lives, when we live our lives from that place of joy, people will take notice. Because people are walking in darkness and they need light. Whether they knew that or not, they need light. And when we shine the light, Sometimes it strikes in just the way that people are like, oh, that's what I needed. I need to find out more about that. You have a light to shine, and there is no darkness that can overcome it, because it is the light of Christ. David went through some dark times as well, and he wrote about those dark times several places throughout the Psalms. One of those examples, this is where we'll start to wrap up. He says to God, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me?" This is somebody in dark times who is experiencing pain, but over and over again in the Psalms that David writes, he doesn't just leave it there in comments like that. He transitions to drawing on God's strength, and by the time he gets to the end of this psalm, he says, "But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation." And so we see somebody that is in a dark time making the choice to rejoice and finding themselves on a new path of joy. So, may we also make the choice to rejoice. May we also remember our identity and remember our purpose in Christ. And may he fill us with joy and use us as vessels of that joy, delivering it to a world in need. May we look for joy in the only place where there is a lasting supply of it, in the promise of our King, our Savior, Jesus Christ.